The old fishermen never feared storms. Storms could be survived. They feared the nights when the lake became perfectly still, because silence meant someone was already watching. They never looked into the water after dark. They never answered a voice from the shore. And if something knocked beneath the boat, they waited. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply waited for the sound to stop. The old people believed every river, every pond, every forgotten lake belonged to an ancient keeper, a being older than the villages built along its shores, older than the first fishermen, older than memory itself. In the oldest Slavic legends, he was called Vodyanoy. Water has always shaped the lives of those who lived across the Slavic lands. Long before roads crossed the forests, before stone bridges spanned the rivers, people built their villages where fresh water could always be found. Rivers carried travelers. Lakes fed entire families. Streams turned the wheels of old mills. Every season, every harvest, every new beginning depended upon water. It gave life, but it also demanded respect. For the ancient Slavs, a river was never just flowing water. A lake was never simply a quiet place beneath the sky. Every bend of a river, every deep pool, every forgotten marsh was believed to possess a spirit of its own. Some places welcomed those who came with humility. Others were said to remember every careless word. Old fishermen often spoke more softly once they reached the shore. Millers greeted the river before their work began. Even children were taught not to mock the water or throw stones into its stillest places without reason. To an outsider, these customs may have seemed like ordinary superstition, but for the people who lived beside those waters, they were simply part of life. Because they believed the water was never truly empty. Somewhere beneath its quiet surface, hidden below the drifting reeds and beyond the reach of sunlight, there lived an ancient keeper. The old stories gave him a name, Vodyanoy. There are places where the water seems different, not because it flows faster, not because it is darker, but because it feels as though it has been watching the world for far longer than anyone can remember. For generations, people spoke of rivers where the current moved strangely, of lakes whose surfaces remained perfectly still, even when the wind stirred the trees around them, of deep pools where no one could ever measure the bottom. Most dismissed these stories as imagination. Others believed every river simply had its own mysteries. But the oldest storytellers offered a different explanation. They believed every body of water had a guardian, not a creature that wandered from place to place, but a keeper bound to the waters he watched. He belonged to the river, to the lake, to the forgotten marsh hidden beyond the reeds. And just as the forest had its ancient master, the waters had one as well. He was not thought to hunt without reason, nor did he seek people without cause. Like the river itself, he could be calm for years, then without warning, become impossible to resist. Perhaps that is why old fishermen never spoke of him lightly, not because they believed he was always near, but because they believed he was always listening, For those who lived beside the rivers, respect was rarely spoken aloud. It was simply understood. Before casting the first net of the season, some fishermen would pause in silence. Others left behind a small piece of bread or a pinch of salt, not because they expected anything in return, but because every gift deserved gratitude. In some villages, the very first fish caught each spring was quietly returned to the water. No celebration, no ceremony, just a pair of careful hands and a ripple disappearing across the lake. People said the river should always receive the first gift. Only then it would continue giving its own. Old millers avoided disturbing the water after nightfall. Those who crossed the deep rivers by boat rarely raised their voices. Children were taught never to throw stones into still water without reason, and never to mock the silence of a lonely lake. No one could say when these customs first began. Perhaps they were nothing more than old traditions, or perhaps they were reminders that people were only guests beside the water, because every river remembers how it is treated. And somewhere beneath its silent surface, the ancient keeper was said to remember as well. There was one thing that nearly every story agreed upon. Vodyanoy belonged to the depths, not to the riverbank, not to the reeds, but to the silent world beneath the water. People believed he rarely revealed himself completely. Most who claimed to have seen him spoke only of brief moments, a face beneath the surface, a hand resting on a half-submerged log, a figure standing motionless where the river suddenly became too deep. The oldest fishermen often said that the water revealed him only to those who looked too long. At first, they would notice nothing unusual, only gentle ripples and the slow movement of reeds. But after a while, they would begin to feel as though someone was watching from below. Some lowered their eyes and walked away. Others remained, trying to see more. The old stories warned that this was the greatest mistake, because once a person became more curious than cautious, the river was no longer the same. From that moment on, they believed Vodyanoy had already seen them. The longer a story lives, the more it begins to change. Each generation remembers something and forgets something else. A fisherman tells the story to his son. The son tells it to his grandchildren. A traveler carries it to another village. A storyteller adds a detail that no one questions. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the legend becomes something new. So it was with Vodyanoy. Some imagined an old man, his beard tangled with river weeds, his clothes heavy with water. Others spoke of pale green skin, eyes that reflected no light, and fingers that seemed far too long. Further away, the stories grew stranger. Some claimed he had the face of a frog. Others gave him scales like a great fish. There were tales that placed horns upon his head or claws upon his hands. As centuries passed, older pagan beliefs met a new world. Ancient spirits were no longer seen simply as guardians of nature. Many became symbols of something darker, something to fear, and little by little, The face of Vodyanoy changed with them. Yet beneath every version, one belief remained almost unchanged. No matter how different people imagined him, they all agreed on one thing. The deep water was never truly empty. Perhaps that was always the real legend. Not the shape of the keeper, but the feeling that someone had always been there. Watching the rivers long before the first villages were built. Watching them still. For this story, we follow one of the oldest traditions, the one that remembers Vodyanoy, not as a monster, but as the ancient keeper of rivers and lakes. The old stories rarely warned people without a reason. They did not teach that every river was dangerous. They taught that every river deserved respect. Those who listened crossed the waters safely. Those who remembered the old customs often returned home. But there were always those who laughed at the stories, who mocked the warnings, who believed that nothing waited beneath the surface. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were found far from where they had entered the water. The elders never rushed to explain. They simply looked toward the river and quietly said, "The keeper has taken what was his." Whether these stories were true, no one can say. Perhaps they were born from grief, from accidents that people could not understand. Or perhaps they were reminders that rivers, like forests, were never meant to be conquered, only respected. Because in the oldest Slavic traditions, nature was never empty. Every forest had its watcher, every hearth had its guardian, and every deep river had its keeper. Perhaps that is why, even today, when the water suddenly grows silent, many people still pause and listen, just in case someone is listening too. The rivers still flow. The lakes still grow silent before the coming storm. Mist still rises above the water, just as it did 1,000 years ago. The world has changed. Villages became cities, wooden boats became steel, ancient beliefs faded. Yet the rivers remained, perhaps. That is why the old stories never truly disappeared. Not because people still feared Vodyanoy, but because they never stopped respecting the water. And maybe that was always the true purpose of the legend. Not to make people afraid, but to remind them that nature has always been older and far greater than ourselves. Some still call him a myth. Others simply pause when the water suddenly becomes still. Because somewhere, deep beneath the surface, the oldest stories are still waiting.